to all you rad people out there from whatever rad place you're watching it, whatever rad time it is. You know the drill. I'm Ryan.
And I'm David.
And together that makes us R-A-D, rad.
Well, yeah.
Today, as always, we have a very, very rad guest. I will say as always because most of our guests tend to be pretty rad, but this is a specifically rad guest for our community. Someone, a face that you should all recognize and know.
Mm-hmm.
David?
It was funny because I briefly mentioned this earlier in the week when I was giving a class, and lots of excitement, honestly. So without further ado, let us introduce the mystery guest of today, Mr. Lee. Thanks for joining us. Awesome.
Hello. Camera on? Oh no. There we go.
Now it is. Perfect.
There you go.
Awesome. Yeah, you gave
All
more.
right, how we doing?
Right there. So we appreciate the suspenseful moment, nonetheless. Thank you. So,
hello.
Yeah, Mr. Lee.
Why don't you tell us where you're talking to us from today?
I am currently in Lyon, France, which is a fairly large city towards the southeast of France.
Lyon?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Lyon.
Very cool,
Yes.
very cool. Very good football team, if I remember right, in terms of the French league. If no.
I have absolutely no idea.
Okay. So,
as you know.
Last year, Mr. Lee, Chase, you're here in Colombia, right? And then over the summer, you transitioned back home, and then eventually you ended up in France. But between France and Colombia, can you tell the audience what are some differences or some similarities that you've noticed?
That's definitely a big question. I was just thinking about that today, and difficult to decide where to start. But I think the first thing is kind of just the general ambiance. I really miss in Colombia that there's always, like music playing. There's always, you hear people in the streets laughing, talking. The soundscape is just so like interesting in Colombia, right? And I really miss that. And just the volume. There's always just something happening, and there's always so much energy. And France is, I'm not going to say the opposite, but it's very, very different. It's a lot more quiet, a lot more calm. People are a lot more reserved. They don't quite have the kind of outward passion and energy so much as you feel in Colombia. So I think that's the first impression that I got being here. And obviously, like, every place is different. Paris is like just enormous,
absolutely
crazy energy coming from that city. But generally, that's kind of the impression that I've gotten.
Oh, very cool, very cool.
Nice. And how long have you been there now? You've been there since the fall?
I've been here since late November. So yeah, was that 5 months?
Okay.
5 months, yeah. Just completed 5 months.
The different seasons and the change in the weather, the change
in the
activities.
Oh my God. The weather was rough, man. The winter was rough.
Yeah, the winter as well, where naturally, the sun is setting, if I'm right in saying, around like 5:15, 5:20. And you're like, wait a second, the sun's already setting right now? And it's like, yeah. So, that's something, honestly, that, being down here and seeing the sunset at 6:30 rather than 4:30 in England, I was like, oh, man, yeah, 2 extra hours of sun makes all the difference right there. Absolutely, yeah. So there's that environment as well of weather, naturally. Absolutely.
No, that was actually probably the biggest shock. Thanks for bringing that up. The winter was brutal because for me, like, I'm from California, and then I've lived in Colombia, and just, constantly the temperature around 0 for 4 months was really hard for me. And I still miss Colombian weather. I still miss the Eje Cafetero climate. So that's actually number one. That's the one biggest thing for sure.
Definitely. And
but I suppose at this point you're headed into longer days now, and
now it's beautiful. Now, the weather's amazing, which is, great because we're locked up here. But now the weather's nice. The weather is generally okay. it doesn't get too cold, it doesn't snow. But still, for me, it was shocking, you know. But now it's great. Now it's spring, wonderful. Yeah.
You know, I'm not someone that likes to normally, you know, put out the stereotypes, but one of the stereotypes about France is that they have excellent food, right? And I know, you know, you've had your fair share of arepas. I know that in Colombia, right? But I bet you know, by going to France, you've tried some things out of the blue where you're just like, wait a second, what is this that I'm eating right now?
I ate I've eaten caviar for the first time here, which was amazing. Lyon is like a really great culinary city.
Oh yeah, no,
People from Lyon consider it to be the best culinary city in France.
yeah.
Just saying something, even better than Paris. I really couldn't comment on that, but yeah, just the standards for food are extremely high here, which is great. Just everywhere, you know, it's kind of the thing where if you have a bad restaurant, it's not going to survive. And just, yeah, just everything's high quality. Everything in like a bakery, French bakeries are amazing.
Yeah.
It's just all just very high quality. What's up?
Les baguettes, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
oh man, it's toasty in there, and I bet during the winter you'd like to go in there and just, you know, warm your hands up by the fireplace. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, French bakeries versus Colombian bakeries. I mean, you can't really compare them because they're completely different. But I'm a big fan of French bakeries. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Nice. So Chase, what was your intention in going to France? I mean, did you go to continue teaching, or what are you doing currently in France?
Yeah. So I did go with the intent of eventually being able to teach here. Just for this year, I've been studying French language in a French institute here in Lyon. Just doing classes in the morning, and then I was actually babysitting in the afternoons, to working part-time. And that's what I was just going to do for this first year, because I just always wanted to learn French. I wanted to add a third language. That was kind of always a goal of mine. And I'm getting better. I'm improving. I'm around B2. I'm in a B2 class right now, which means I'm conversational, but I'm not great. I'm not great. It's not good. We're not going to speak French. I'm not going to speak French for you.
I couldn't do it anyway, so.
You know,
yeah.
For someone learning a new language, and you know, I know your Spanish and English is very good. So, in the terms of the French language, do you see more connection with English or with Spanish? You know.
Definitely Spanish.
More Spanish.
Yeah, for sure. It's been, I mean, I'm not going to say it's been easy, but it's been surprisingly, I think I've improved surprisingly fast, because since I learned Spanish in the same way from zero, like as an adult, right now learning French, I feel like I'm basically learning, I feel like I've seen all of the grammar already, and I'm just learning new vocabulary and kind of plugging it in, new vocabulary, new pronunciation, obviously. But I feel like a lot of the grammar is very similar, and just structurally in general, it's similar. So it hasn't been like I'll say like the learning curve, like for me when I was learning Spanish at first at age 18, it was like this, like super, you know, super difficult, really a mountain to climb. With French, it's been like kind of like half of that, the learning curve. So it's been fun.
Oh, very
do you feel like your experience as an English teacher, it has affected in any way like your learning as a language student?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Because it's I definitely try to like practice what I've preached, in terms of, you know, being very diligent, studying vocabulary, like actually like studying in your free time. Because I think language learning has to be that. It has to kind of be something that you constantly absorb, especially if you're an adult learning a second or third language. So just constant practice. Yeah, like really getting as much exposure as possible, going out and trying to just take advantage of every conversation that you can have with somebody, and just really understanding that like the work that you put in is an investment, and it'll pay off at some point, and you'll improve faster if you do that.
Absolutely.
Nice. So you're saying that trilingualism is very possible for us who already have a good feel out for two languages. we can add a third one, and it might even be easier than the second.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, I think French, Italian, Portuguese, I think everything in that family is, I think it's just, you kind of just get it. It just kind of makes sense. And I think, David, you already speak French.
Yeah, well, maybe not B2, but B1. Yeah, I mean, enough to like get by in a town, walk around, talk to someone, but not like you tell me to sit down and have a conversation. No, but I think that is the element. That's kind of the peak when you're able to sit down with someone of a foreign language and have a conversation. Not the simple, how do you do? I would like this. Like those. It's the conversation that I think is the peak of that curve that you talked about. I don't know. At least maybe that's my interpretation. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Because once you go through it, you're able to have a conversation for 2 to 3 minutes. You're intaking vocabulary at the same time, right? Like, he or she might mention something, and you're like, But from the context, I just learned a new word, right? So I think, like, for me, in terms of languages, I've always said conversation is the peak of the curve. And once you reach that, you don't have those exponential, incredible growths that you had when you first started the language. It's more gradual, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's good that it's interesting that you say that too, because I read an article several months ago, and I forget where I found it, but it was talking about how learning a language should be seen as a skill and more of a means to an end, the end being a conversation rather than an art form. Because a lot of people, they strive for like artistry and like perfection in being able to speak the second language, and it makes them so self-conscious that they can't even get past their own anxieties of making a mistake, and so they end up not speaking as much and not speaking as confidently, and they end up not improving as fast. And I actually really took that to heart. And it's interesting because with French, like, I've just been hit the ground running, just talking, don't care if I make mistakes, don't care if like people judge me. I mean, obviously it comes with a little bit of anxiety and fear at when you start out learning a second language. But it's funny now, because if I make a mistake when I speak Spanish, because I actually have a lot of Colombian friends here in France, a lot of the other students in the school, so I've been speaking a lot of Spanish. But if I make a mistake with them, it like really hurts me for some reason, because I've been learning Spanish for 10 years, right? And so if I make a mistake, I'm like, like, what's wrong with me? It hurts for some reason, because I think when I first started it, I really was trying to be perfect, and still trying to be perfect in Spanish, and it's probably never going to be perfect. But with French, I'm just kind of, I just go. So that has made it really easy to improve fast. So.
And Chase, you brought up an element of the conversation. My experience in France, I don't know if you've had this experience, but French culture, in terms of them, like, I'm a foreign speaker of French, I'm going to speak to you in French, but then they reply in English. Like there's that natural, I don't know, there's something that I always found whilst here in Colombia, or in Spain. If I were to speak Spanish, it was always like, okay, he's trying, we'll reply in Spanish. We're not going to force ourselves to switch to his native tongue. But France was always a country I felt that they're always, if you try and speak our language, we'll speak your language in return. Do you have that experience sometimes?
I think yes and no. I think a lot of people here want to practice English.
Okay.
But French, I mean, France is not, I wouldn't call it a bilingual country at any extent. I mean, it's not on the level of Germany or like the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland. It's definitely not that. So, but there are like a fair share of people who definitely want to like hear your accent, and they want to practice English with you. But again, it's also the thing where like French people are very proud of their language too, especially in Paris. Yeah. And so like if you go in and you speak English immediately to people and you don't speak French, you don't at least try, it's received very negatively. People take it as kind of an insult. It's considered rude, which is understandable, I think. And I don't know, generally, like selfishly, I'm just like trying to practice French, and I've just kind of switched when I go outside. I switch that off, and I'm just like, I don't expect people to speak English with me. So that's usually like pretty well received. And if you do meet somebody who, I mean, I've made friends here, like French friends, and they really want to practice English with me, so they speak to me in English and I speak to them in French, and that's how we've had a conversation. So I haven't really had so much of a problem with that. I think it's, I don't know. I mean, if you just bring I don't know, like if you just bring positivity into every interaction that you have, like you're gonna probably be okay. And like if you're in a country and you're speaking their language, it's probably gonna be received well, generally speaking. So I really haven't had too much of a problem with that.
Absolutely. Another.
Yeah.
No, no, sorry, Ryan. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say it's nice. It's nice to know that, yeah, that again, that people are receptive towards it. I guess like here in Colombia, you find that all the time, right? I mean, you speak Spanish with somebody, and well, and you demonstrate that you're not a native speaker, and they're just like elated with you just even trying. You could speak the worst hacked up Spanish, and they'd just be in love with you just for even giving it a try, right? But I've always had this sensation that like being in France, especially, is different. French always have had that reputation, right?
Yeah, I mean,
language.
yeah, what you say about Colombia is definitely true. Like, yeah, people in Colombia
Right,
when you speak Spanish to them, they're ecstatic, right?
right.
And a lot of times, I think a lot of the difficult interactions that I had were when I start to speak Spanish to somebody and they hear the accent and they think that they're gonna have to speak English at some point, so they get like scared, right? So they're like, oh no, like I didn't know, like, and it's like, no, 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 like don't worry, like I speak Spanish, like it'll be fine. But when they, yeah, like your Colombian people are super, well, always in my experience, were so supportive of
Yeah.
second language learners.
Right.
And it's definitely not the same in France, right? But I don't think it's as, I think, yeah, that aspect of it hasn't been so bad for me in France. I think the problem that I had, or the negative interactions I have been with like waiters, for example, in restaurants, or people at like in like service industry jobs, like people who work at stores and stuff, because they can be very rude, especially if they hear your French. And people who work in government offices, I could go off on like a really probably inappropriate rant right now about people who work in those offices in France, because they can be extremely rude, and really look down at you for being a foreigner and for not having perfect French. So that's definitely that has been my experience. But I think in interactions with like normal people, it hasn't been that way. So that would be my conclusion.
Good. I mean, so Chase, I've spent a lot of time in England, and there's one thing I don't understand between England and France. What is their problem with each other? Like the English hate the French and the French hate the English. It's something that I don't know. There's some kind of beef, and it goes all the way back to like 13 1400s. But today, the English still, for whatever reason, have this like kind of like mm, clash with the French, and the French have this clash with the English. Have you maybe heard or seen any of that? I'm curious from the French side, because I've heard the English side, and it's always unpleasant things that they say. They're very good at unpleasantries, the English, I will say. But in terms of France, maybe you've heard something talked about the English. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I I wish I could. I know I was a social studies teacher, and I should be able to give like a historic account of why those those things exist, but I really can't. I'm guessing that probably some of those historic conflicts probably still maybe influence how, or maybe affect the relationship today. Um, but I don't. What I would say is I think it's probably similar to, because a lot of people have asked me here like, what's the difference between Americans and the French? And
Yeah.
I think so. I've had a lot of those conversations. And I think it's probably similar to the differences between the British and the French, because culturally, Americans and British um, are a lot closer, I
Yeah.
would say, than us to the French or the British to the French.
Yeah.
for the language, obviously, but just for other reasons. So usually what I say is that, you know, Americans typically are a lot more, I guess, outgoing, a lot more, I would say, outspoken, a lot less reserved, a lot more enthusiastic,
Yeah.
more expressive with kind of their emotions and positivity. And the French are a lot more reserved, a lot more quiet. It's, yeah, they're
You know,
not just, yeah.
the reason I asked that because all right, I mean I have this crazy friend of mine in England, and his passwords are all passwords of when the English beat the French in famous battles. So he'll be like, yeah, 1350, 1453. One is what is it, 16? I don't know. I think it was 1609. And it's like, wait a second, you're telling me all your passwords, like including your bank account, is one of the famous battles that the English beat the French? He's like, yeah, no. And it's like, man, you're just like, closed-minded right there. Yeah, but that's the reason I asked, because I was always thinking like, what's this guy's beef with the French right here? Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, but I guess putting things in a historical context, I mean, yeah, you can look at so many different examples across the globe when those kind of old beefs or those
Yeah.
old conflicts still, yeah, impact like current like relations and whatnot. And that, yeah, I think that's really interesting, how that happens between certain places. Yeah, and I again, I can't go into like, you probably know a lot more about the British French relations over the centuries, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure those things still have an effect today.
Yeah.
Probably some prince stole some other prince's wife or something like
Yeah,
that.
you know, it's probably something like that. Yeah, you
People
know,
haven't been able to get
petty
over
stuff.
it.
Yeah, just petty conflict, you know.
Right. And so the
How it
whole
always
country
is.
has to identify with that, and we all have to hate each other for that.
Right, or it could just be about football, or it could just be about soccer. It could just be that too.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely insane when it comes down to the World Cup in France and England. Honestly, I mean, the French, like when they won the World Cup, the whole town was apparently absolutely. I heard some stories or another, but like the English, they're just as bad because it's like, oh mate, we beat Sweden in the World Cup. We're in the semis right now. Yeah, we beat Sweden. Let's go storm an IKEA and destroy some stuff in there. And like you see a video of just a stampede charging into IKEA, just flipping over stuff and being like, "Yeah, football's coming home, mate." You're like, "Oh, yeah, okay." But I don't know. French has a very similar kind of football, like football is our culture kind of vibe to it as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it takes, like I said, it takes a lot for French people to really get riled up and to really get enthusiastic, like positively about something.
Yeah.
So, and football is one of those things that I've seen. Yeah.
Universal, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, the other part of French culture too is that they protest a lot. They're very famous for that. God, I mean, there's constantly protests, and I think in January, between like December of last year and January, there were just like protests throughout the country, and shutting down a lot of like transport, in the country. I think a lot of flights were being canceled coming into France. This is, right before the coronavirus.
Yeah.
But even before that, because of like national protests, it was really difficult to travel. So that was really interesting because I didn't know that was really a part of French culture, but apparently it is. They're very
I think one of the things when I was I remember hearing on the news, like for example in the States, right? If they were to increase the retirement age, right, people would be like, oh, no, sorry, decrease it from 65, let's say, to 61. People would be like, oh yeah, no, this is fantastic. But they do that in France. People are out in the streets and rioting and like in front of government buildings, and it was like, wait a second. Two countries lowering retirement age, and the reaction between one and the other is like, polar opposites, if you will, definitely.
Yeah, it gets really intense in in France, and it gets very violent too. And it's not really the image that I had of France when I got here. I didn't think that it was a place where, you know, you had police beating people up in the streets.
Yeah.
And not to say that it happens all the time, but it's very frequent here. And I was surprised when I got here to learn about that. But those are kind of the interesting things that you learn about a place when you actually go and live there, you know? So,
Yeah.
So speaking of COVID and the current situation then, and looking towards like I don't know, I find it very interesting because I think that, you know, we're all a little bit aware of what's going on in different parts of the world. But I mean, it's limited, obviously. Our perspectives are very limited. And, you know, I mean, my perspective towards what's happening here in my own city is limited because I usually don't go outside of like my housing complex right now. So, but I'm wondering, you know, since there's protests going on in the United States right now, people that are protesting the whole idea of of I don't know, like trying to prevent. Well,
the
I don't know what
protesting the
I don't know what
pandemic itself.
is behind the protest. But since France is such a protesting country, is anybody protesting COVID right now?
That's a really good question. That's a really yeah, good observation. Not to my knowledge, you know. No, not to my knowledge. I think people here have been very I guess obedient to all of the restrictions and the quarantine and whatnot. Yeah, man, God, yeah, I I can't. Yeah, the fact that there's Americans, you know, in my home state too, in California, because we consider, you know, usually we have an image of ourselves that we don't do really stupid stuff like that, like protesting a pandemic, the pandemic itself. But there's people in California who are protesting right now, and it's insane. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened in France. People have been very obedient, very calm. And I think part of that maybe had to do with the fact that it hit Italy so hard, and it really scared a lot of people, right? Because Italy was the first place that in Europe, I think outside of like Asia, where there was a massive outbreak, at least that like I knew of. But when it blew up in Italy, people in France like were like, okay, like this is real, like this is gonna happen, right? Because it got really bad really fast in Italy. And I think because of that, people were like, okay, like we don't want that to happen, so let's like follow the rules. So it's been, my impression is that it's been very, that people have definitely like fallen in line, and they're not. I mean, I haven't seen anything yet about people protesting the quarantine. So I'm grateful to be here.
That's fantastic.
Oh man.
And Chase, you're currently in Lyon, but any other places that you've explored in France, or some areas that, you know, before this started that you really, you know, looked into and you're interested in checking out, you know, maybe the coast. I mean, obviously you're on the southern coast, but there's some beautiful beaches on the Mediterranean, or further up north, you have Normandy and Paris. For you, where have you gone, and tell us about where you've been in France per se? Yeah.
Yeah, sadly, kind of my spring and summer plans have been canceled, and I was going to, since I'm kind of in the south, I was going to explore, the southern region, the kind of the Mediterranean, because that's the area that really interests me a lot. And when I got here, it was like winter, so it was really cold. I really didn't want to go that far up north because I really couldn't deal with the cold weather. But I went to Paris twice, which was amazing. I had always dreamt of going to Paris, and so I got that done. Amazing city, super, you know, important memories that for my life that I made. So I was really happy with that. And honestly, it's, in that sense, it's been a little bit disappointing because I haven't seen so much of France. I visited a couple of cities kind of in the region that I'm in. I went to Geneva, which is in Switzerland, so I saw another country. But then for Christmas and New Year's, for like winter break, I went to Italy, which was amazing. It was my first time there. So I went to Rome, I went to Florence, kind of did a trip on like the countryside. It was like 2 weeks. I saw some friends. It was amazing. So I saw Rome and I saw Paris, which were my two cities I really wanted to see. So I have nothing to complain about. Yeah, but I'm probably not gonna leave Lyon until I don't know, until I go home or until I know it's very safe to travel, which might be never. So.
One thing that always interested me about geography in France per se is, you know, I mean, obviously France shares quite a large border with Germany. And ever since like Charlemagne's time, that area has been fought between France and Germany or Holy Roman Emperor or you know, Empire or some kind of entity that occupied those areas since the year 700 AD. So what I find interesting is that like Strasbourg, right? You're like Strasbourg. Has like a German sound to it, but it's in France. Or the town next to it, which is Mertz, and it's like that's a German sounding town, but it's in France. But then you get the reverse in Germany as well, of like some French sounding towns, and they're in Germany, right? So I find it very interesting how that territory shifted power over, you know, hundreds of years to the degree that you've got towns that sound French and towns that sound German on one side and the other. You know, it's something that in terms of geography of France that I always like, I don't know, found very appealing in terms of that location and obviously World War II, etc. But, you know, for you, you know, you've done some traveling in Europe, as you've mentioned. Have you seen many similarities with French culture in other parts of Europe as well?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring that up because for me that's been so eye-opening. Like you said, kind of this amalgamation, if
Yeah.
you will, of cultures, which is so different from I think what we have in the US because we're so monolingual and everybody speaks English and you definitely don't have kind of those cultural and linguistic kind of overlaps like you have in Europe.
Yeah.
Which has been super interesting for me to observe. And like beyond that too, kind of the kind of like the regional versus like the national languages which exist. For example, like stuff, I don't think this exists so much in France. But for example, in Italy, right? Like most people's image of Italy is that they speak Italian, right? Which
Yeah.
they do. But also, I have learned that in Italy, they speak like several hundred regional languages, right? Which is similar to Italian, but also, you know, particular to their region, which I had no idea about that, right? And I had traveled before, like we went to Spain, right? And they have the four Spanish languages. So I was like, that for me was like, okay, I kind of get that. But to see in Italy, for example, where they have all these regional languages and just all across Europe, and then going down to like North Africa, which is even more like that, right? Because people there speak Arabic, they speak French, they speak their regional language. There's such a mix of culture, and it's been super cool to see and to meet people. And yeah, it's something that we don't have so much in the Americas in general, right? Because we do tend to be very monolingual, and it's definitely been an education to be here and learn about those things.
Yeah, it's interesting how I think from like the Americans' perspective, you for instance, like what David was saying about borders, you know, I mean, you think, well, okay, everybody who's on the French side of the border between France and Italy are, you know, very French, and everybody but I mean, it's not that simple. And
Right.
yeah, like you said, amalgamation, right? There's mixture, there's smaller subcultures that aren't as easily defined or placed into one category. So from an outsider's perspective, yeah, you can't really see that stuff, but
Oh yeah.
it's,
No, there's just so many languages, you know what I mean?
right.
And you meet people who have the most interesting backgrounds, right? They were, I don't know, they were born in Morocco, but they were raised in Italy, and then they speak this and they speak that, and it's really culturally extremely rich. Not to say that American culture in its ways are, but yeah, I've definitely been kind of, I guess, envious in a way of those people just based on their background, like speak 4 or 5 languages. You know what I mean?
Right.
And they've spoken them their entire lives, right? 4 languages, just like that. Amazing. Yeah, and it's everywhere here. And you just, I mean, being in Europe, you just meet the most interesting people. You know, you meet people from, like, I have friends from Kazakhstan, and my roommate was from Kyrgyzstan, for example, countries I had never even heard of, but are super interesting actually. And in them, in those countries in themselves have really interesting mix of culture. Yeah, so Europe definitely, you definitely get a sense of that being here, which not to, when you're in the US, like we're very diverse, especially kind of in California. But I'd never met somebody from Kazakhstan until coming here. So yeah.
Definitely.
And are you thinking about exploring east a little bit? I found, I don't know, I found that to be one of the most, when I traveled around Europe a little bit, one of the most interesting places. And maybe like, I don't know, it's funny because I think being in Prague was one of the things that actually, like, in a way, caused me to be more interested in coming to Colombia. Like, I was in Prague, and I remember, I was in Prague in 2010, and so really, I mean, we're only talking about like 20 years or so since the fall of communism, and Prague seemed to be sort of one of the most interesting places in Europe in terms of like potential. And it made me start to think about things like that the places with the most potential are usually the places that were dangerous for a time, or that don't have like the best reputations. And so, like, for instance, Colombia sort of started to pop off in my mind as, even, I mean, I already had ideas about Colombia, but even more attractive because I knew that, it had had this difficult past. But I think difficult pasts also lead to like very interesting potential. And so I don't know, I think the Eastern Europe is really, really interesting. I'd
Yeah.
love to go and see more.
How many months did you do on your trip?
Only like two and a half months, really.
Yeah,
Not
but
very
you
long.
really like backpacked. You really like saw
Yeah, we
a
moved
lot of.
around quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, although we were in Germany for like 3 weeks of that, so yeah.
Yeah.
But eventually got over to the Czech Republic, to Hungary, Austria.
Yeah.
That
No,
was
I've actually no. It's funny you bring that up because I was actually I'm more interested in, I guess, yeah, kind of like Eastern European countries and maybe exploring those places than I would, for example, to go to like Amsterdam or to go to Germany. Not that those places are not interesting, but I feel like it's not going to be such a interesting cultural difference between what I've already from what I've already seen, because I've already
right.
been to some of the major European cities. So yeah, I was kind of interested in checking out like Croatia. I don't know that. Yeah, I mean, there's so many little countries in there that you don't know anything about, but
Yeah.
are really, really interesting. I don't know, Slovakia, Slovenia, places like that.
I
So
mean,
yeah, I was kind of interested. Greece, I wasn't interested in going there, but we'll see if it happens. I don't know. Anything
Right.
could happen in the next 3 months, though.
the geographical territories amongst Eastern Europe, we were talking originally before that question about, regional languages. The density of regional languages within Eastern Europe, is immense. You've got Slovakian, Romanian, there are a whole bunch, Greek, go on and on, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea, but they're all so dense in that area. And, in many ways, one has to question, are they going to be able to keep that regional language, right? Like, I know in Spain, for example, okay, sure, you got Catalan, you got Vasco as well up there, but those kind of regional languages, and even people in Spain talk about it today, those regional languages will not last for the long-term future. I mean, sure, they've lasted up to now because the parents of people today, they grew up having to speak that as language number 2 in a classroom, and language number 3 was English, right? But language number 2 was the regional, kind of language that you were learning at the same time. So I'm curious about, where regional languages will go in the future, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely can't speak to how we might, preserve regional languages
Yeah.
too. But
Yeah.
I mean, what I can say is I think I definitely agree with that. And my sense has been, yeah, I think the people who I've met who speak those regional languages, like I get a sense that there's a sense of pride with them,
Mm.
right? But I don't know. I don't know if even I don't know. What I'm saying is probably completely correct, but I haven't talked to people who are so um like outgoing in terms of like, oh yeah, like I speak this really interesting regional language, or I speak this like Arabic dialect, you know what I mean? Like I've gotten the sense that most people are more proud of the fact that they learned English, or the fact that they're learning Spanish, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, for me, who I already speak English, I'm like, no, 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 but that's so cool. Like, speak to me in I don't know, I'm forgetting I don't know, but like, speak to me in like your regional language. That's so cool. I've never heard of it. But and they're kind of like, oh no, like I only speak that with like my family or with like my aunt or whatever. I'm like, no, but that's so interesting. That's amazing. But they're more interested in speaking English, right? That's kind of the impression I've got from meeting people. So I don't know how. I have no idea how those things are going to be preserved as people continue to move into cities. I mean, after COVID, who knows what the world's going to look like? But as people continue to move into cities, yeah, I mean, those languages definitely become more obsolete and less, I guess, useful in terms of, having a life in the year 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame because they're really interesting.
I mean, I have a friend in Barcelona, and yeah, he works at schools and everything, and he's told me that he finds more parents that are pressuring the school for their kids to learn English than to learn Catalan, and it's like that's the new direction. It's like regional language. Okay, no. I think in the children's education, it's important to have the universal language. In many ways. I mean, I guess we can say English is a universal language. There's someone somewhere in a town that will speak it. So in many ways, I'm curious. Obviously, people leaning more towards a universal than a regional language today, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because learning English is so practical and it's so important. And I mean, as an English teacher, like and somebody who is trying to, add more languages, like I'm totally a proponent of like, yeah, learn languages, learn important languages. Not important languages, but learning new languages is important.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if you learn English or you learn French or Spanish or Mandarin or something, like you're just going to be able to speak to more people, and there's going to be more opportunities for you in terms of I guess your career, just more options present for you. Not to say that they're more important than regional languages, but yeah, that's tough. And Catalan, man, because that's such a like a great language,
Element in there, honestly, with the use of the j. Like the J in Portuguese is a very emphatic J, and Catalan is kind of like it's Jaime. Me llamo Jaime, and it's like Jaime? No, Jaime. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. That's the Portuguese J per se. Yeah.
Yeah, and like who can imagine Barcelona without the how that impacts like the kind of the separatist movement. I shouldn't say separatist, but the independence movement in Catalan and Catalonia, right?
Yeah.
And all of that culture, which is extremely important to like their cultural identity and their history, right? Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see if the world has a place for those types of I don't know, smaller cultural movements, or if that will be sort of, I don't know, not to say the word, but irrelevant in the new world order of things, whatever that might look like. But virtuality is also, a homogenizing force. I mean, it's just, there are way more people who can interact with this podcast in English than Catalan, right? And so, I don't know. But it works both ways. Like I actually, not that I followed through with it, but I started in January. I started Duolingo, and I started Irish. And one of the things that attracted me to it was that they said there are currently more people learning Irish on Duolingo than native Irish speakers.
Right.
That is incredible. I mean, that's so
Dude,
I don't know.
the longest word in the world is a Welsh word, and it has like 38 letters in it. But it's also like Welsh letters. And I have one Welsh friend who's able to say it. And I'm like, wait. Go back 10 seconds. Say that word again. What is that? Yeah. And there's like Welsh letters, you know, and it's like, what is that letter right there? It's a backwards P that you're putting up. But yeah. So it's, you know, I don't know. And even in Europe, there's like different alphabets per se for Welsh, you know, or for naturally, of course, Eastern Europe has its own alphabet, etc. as well. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Well, even like Italian people that I've met in the conversations I've had, they're like, yeah, you don't need to speak Italian. Like nobody speaks Italian. Nobody is learning Italian. And it's like, well, I mean, I don't know, like Italian, it's like, it's this kind of super romantic language is that people, I mean, at least as Americans, we idolize it, idealize it. Right. But yeah, I mean, how many people really need to speak Italian or want to learn Italian?
The old joke I've heard with Italian, if you can move your hands, you've got half of it down already. So, you know, half of it's already there. The message is already being relayed to you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, but I don't want to admit or to say that Italian itself is like a dying language because it's
Right.
not, but it's not
Yeah.
a quote unquote global language, right? It's more practical to learn Spanish now than to learn Italian.
Right.
So who knows?
Yeah. And probably as well as more practical these days to learn Spanish than French, right? I mean, French had a lot of world influence for many years, but I think Spanish probably is much more widely spoken anyway, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, at least for us, you know, as Americans, like it's so useful, you know. Portuguese as well, I think, is incredibly useful. I mean, you know, like I think speaking any language, any second language is just useful for yourself, for your brain.
Personally, yeah.
Personally, right? But yeah, again, if you, I mean, learning one of these big kind of like global languages, like, I mean, learning Mandarin, for example, I would love to be able to speak Mandarin, right? Just for where it can put you, you know, you automatically just climb up and jump and just climb up the ladder in terms of and you enhance like your profile professionally, right? If you're somebody who speaks English and can speak Spanish and speak Chinese, like you're right at the top. You're super marketable to all these like jobs.
I heard younger, like when somebody said, like, David, if you should learn a language, make sure you focus on one of the BRIC economies, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, you know, and you've got Portuguese, Russian, Punjabi, and Chinese, right? And it's like, well, actually that logic of focus on a language in one of the emerging economies, because you don't know what will happen in 50 years with that language. It might become the new business English that people speak, you know, nobody really knows. But, you know, at the end of the day, like you said at the very beginning, talking to people in a different language, you know, there's nothing wrong. You're immediately building connections right there. Absolutely.
Right. And I think there's also a lot of value and, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, like at an individual level, you got to live your life. And if you want to learn another language, like learn a language that you want to learn, right? So like for me, like I was interested in learning Chinese because I am Chinese, and I started out in college studying international business, and I thought it would be so interesting, and it just didn't click with me for whatever reason. I wasn't as interested in learning it in itself as I was learning Spanish, for example. And that's, you know, that's not going to work. Like if you're not interested in the culture as so much and the language in itself, you're really going to struggle to learn it. And why make that investment, right? So for me, it was like, yeah, I'm super interested in Latin America. I want to travel. I definitely want to learn Spanish. The motivation was intrinsic, and it made it easy to get motivated to learn it. And I felt the same way about French. So there's that aspect as well.
Right.
Very cool.
Nice.
Yeah, and Spanish is just a beautiful language. Like, you know, you gotta speak Spanish. You gotta do it.
You know, Chase, you've seen me, you know, when we were in Madrid, like, you know, speaking Spanish. But dude, I've had to transition coming from Spain Spanish to down here, where it's like Yeah, no, I was like, okay, first week here, people are like, David, we don't really say that word. I'm like, huh, really? Oh, okay, well, yeah. So, man, yeah, just
I want, yeah.
full language, but different, varieties, if you will, like all over. Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that actually, because I think Ryan has probably had the similar experience that, especially in Pereira, which is, not yet such an international city. There's not so many foreigners walking around. There's not just a lot of like foreign accents that are heard in Pereira. And like me, like I think my Spanish is pretty good, and I think my accent and my pronunciation was always like pretty good, right?
No.
And I would have moments where it was really hard for me to communicate with people because maybe I was the first foreigner that they were ever speaking with, right? And there was immediately like, oh my God, like, no. And I was like, no, just wait. Like, I know what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying is correct. Just listen to me, right? But really, like, people having a hard time to understand your accent because it's just a little bit different from what they've heard, especially like on the phone, right? So have you had that as well? Because you're a native Spanish speaker.
Yeah, no. People actually, honestly, when I've spoken to people in Spanish, they've often asked me to repeat because naturally, like, I'll speak very quickly or I'll say a word that's like, the thing I think that's different is the pronunciation of, we don't pronunciate in Spain Spanish like vowels. You don't really hear the vowel, but here you hear, when I hear people,
Okay.
you hear a lot more of the vowel being spoken in the pronunciation than in Spain Spanish, where it's like, the vowel disappears, like, a veces es que no sé dónde me voy, and it's like, wait, sorry, where was the vowel in that sentence? Yeah, it's like the vowel kind of disappears, I find. Yeah, that's
interesting.
For me, at least, that's what I find as the main pronunciation difference between the two, I think.
Yeah, I never really realized that. I haven't spent enough time in Spain, but yeah, no, but if people, yeah, like I said, like if people had a hard time understanding you, like I definitely, like on the phone, oh my God, the lady at Arroz Paisa, for example, like it was always the same girl. It was always the same girl. and I would just like, Carrera 17, ve. And she'd be like, yeah, pero like, and it would just be awful every single time. And I would go in there, I'd be like, do you not understand me? And she'd be like, no, I know. I'd be like, all right. Poor girl.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Chase, we had a long podcast, and I have to say, really enjoyed today, honestly, kind of talking about France and then talking about the nature of language, honestly. So I want to thank you for joining us, and I know you've made many people happy on the channel watching the video on Friday. So thank you once again for taking your time and your schedule to have you on our channel, definitely.
Yeah, man.
Oh yeah, me and my yeah, thank you. Me and my busy schedule, right? Taking up a bit of my time.
Dude, at the end of the day, like, we just got to push stuff in a day and be like, okay, I've got 12 hours today. How am I going to put as much as I can in the day? Yeah, no. So thank you. Yeah, definitely.
And for the students who are watching who have watched the end of this video, hi, how you guys doing? I miss you. Hope you're doing well. Be good.
Yeah. Please, guys, listen to Mr. Lee. Yeah, listen. Be good. Yeah.
No gum chewing in class.
Yeah.
Right. There you go.
All right. So on that note, everyone, Ryan, you want to take us out?
Been another rad podcast because I'm Ryan.
And I'm David. And you're watching the show. Bye, everyone.